Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, I have to admit that I ran into a technological error just before we started this session on my laptop, my LCD. So basically my screen is not working. Therefore, all my passwords, everything, all my logins are saved there. I am using the family computer which is a lot more limited than what I have. But anyway, so technically the slides that I'm sharing with you should be interactive slides, but I don't have the option to do that on this computer. So what we can do instead, we can just use, if you have anything to add, if you could please just add that in the Zoom chat box. And so we can just proceed that way. Oh, let me just go back to this first slide and just make the bridge from domestic students and international students. So I would say that while our domestic students are probably more familiar with all the social justice movements happening on campus, outside of campus, so on social media, on TV, in their everyday conversations, are international students or even the adult immigrant communities or population, they might not be familiar with what's going on with the LGBTQ community, with people of color, with all sorts of marginalized communities, targeted communities versus dominant communities. So anti-racist, so they probably hear, you know, anti-racist education. They probably hear acceptance, and they probably hear a lot of sort of, you know, calling words on their campuses. But of course, you know, do they know what it means and how they may be able to contribute or interpret what's going on around them? And so I started thinking about this question. So how do we teach all this? How do we include references to what is going on in the, you know, the U.S. American society around these students? And should we, like, who should be the one explaining it to them? And if it's us, if we think that it should be part of the language program, because when we teach language, we not only teach language, we probably also teach culture as well. How much of it should we pay attention to? How much time should we spend on? What sort of topics should we discuss with the students? And so this is something that I would like to explore with you today. Let me just ask you this question, and then you can just do a thumbs up on the Zoom screen. So in your current curriculum that you follow, or in the ESL courses that you teach, is there any emphasis on teaching about culture or intercultural adjustment or cross-cultural adjustment? So is there anything specific about it in your curriculum or in the courses that you teach? And so please feel free to use the thumbs up or the thumbs down. All right, so it doesn't look too very promising at this point.
I'm at 4 p.m. I like that.
Yes. All right, so even if your answer was no and thinking, well, how am I going to contribute? I think that you still can. So, you know, please stay here. I think this is your place then to be. So because my Pear Deck tool isn't working on my computer here, once again, if you just want to write down something that you definitely want to share with us, just put it in the Zoom box in the chat, because we're recording the session. So essentially, the chat is going to be recorded. So I can just sort of synthesize all the information that we gather from each other. So if you have any websites to share, any links to useful information, please do that. So let's document it in the chat box. So we can then, my plan is then to sort of compile all the information and then just send it out to WATESOL the WATESOL higher ed community. Okay, so let's start with baby steps. Let's start with the beginning of all the discussions that that can be related to culture, and that's the cultural iceberg. Because this is something that people sometimes actually bring up in the courses. So I wonder if you discuss the cultural iceberg with your students, or do you discuss the concept of culture itself or cultural dimensions? There have been many experts in the field setting up different dimensions and different categories. So what do you do, or do you do this at all?
I have used the cultural iceberg in the past. There's been like a really basic version of it in a textbook that I used years ago, and I kind of thought, oh, hang on a minute. I'm pretty sure there are better versions of it than this. So I took what was in the textbook, which I can't even remember which book it was now, and just kind of expanded that. But that was only once that I came across it actually kind of in any sort of, material aimed at ESL students. They responded very well to it, actually. That was a good thing.
I've definitely used the iceberg a lot, so much that I feel like, oh, the iceberg is back. And also the idea of an onion, that you can kind of peel back the layers and it really gets deep. I really like the iceberg because it shows kind of the depth of culture that you can't see, and the items that, like the Titanic on the ocean got in trouble because of all those layers of ice down beneath, kind of that will cause you more potential issues, or just that are deeper and harder to see. I think it is a good metaphor for that.
Ari, would you like to add on to the discussion? Maybe not. Okay.
I think that I was just going to say, I mean, it has been a while since I used the iceberg image itself, but Julie chatted another image that can be useful. Visuals, I think, are a great starting point that help communicate a lot with less words. So whether it's the iceberg image or some other image, those are often useful starting points to engage in a conversation. So thanks, Julie, for sharing an alternative version.
So I assume that, at the end of the day, our goal is just to show students how complex culture is, whether if we use, the onion or a tree or an iceberg, so that they can see the complexity. Because sometimes, sometimes I do receive a question, so what is the American culture? And I'm thinking, yeah, like how much time do you have? Because it's not going to be a one-liner. It's just going to be, deeper than that. And do you ever bring in Hofstede's cultural dimensions, or I think Erin Mayer is another expert in the field, a researcher. Fawn Trompignards is another one. And they have really good sort of maps to show the dimensions, where students can even place themselves on a map. I think Trompignards has 7 dimensions, cultural dimensions. Erin Myers set up 8 on her culture map, and Hofstede set up 6. Started out with 4 and then 5. Now we're at 6, and that just shows that it's an ongoing research, about culture, just the discussion itself, and how much information we can sort of uncover as we survey people, as we observe them. And something that students also find interesting is when we talk about how culture can be interpreted in a different way. If you're looking at it from the point of view of an economist or a politician or an anthropologist or a psychologist, so different fields actually view it so very differently. And it's almost like students can somehow feel, more connected when they understand that there are all these different approaches. But it's definitely worth, sharing. And just one last thing about this slide. Telling students that all the research that has been done so far, so the research has been fairly narrow and sometimes nationalistic, and sometimes it ignores certain communities within a country, within borders. And so when I ask students, for instance, to place themselves on these maps, on diagrams or dimensions, they find it, well, they say that my culture is very individualistic, but I myself feel that I'm more for the community and more. So then it's good to then have a conversation about how even individuals differ within cultures, and then let's not focus on sort of the narrow view of generalization of certain dimensions of cultures. And just opening with that and telling students, okay, this is like step 1 or like, point 2, and then we're not even at the details.
Well, and I think, Christina, that also makes me think about ways to introduce the complexity of culture, even within an individual, that a student might act very individualistic in one context, but more collectivistic in another context. And that culture is not something that you can just like easily define, even within an individual, that it's, changing and dynamic.
Right. And you can actually do a lot of reflections with students when it comes to, okay, let's just the discussion of cultural dimensions. So there can be a lot of moments when students can just reflect on who they are, and thinking about their upbringing, their families, their relationships with friends, and so on. So it doesn't really require a whole lot of sort of academic thinking. It's just a little bit of metacognition that can help students just to make the connections themselves. This is something that students can definitely write about, talk about, discuss. I normally bring in examples, and I bring in reading material or viewing material, videos. Of course, anyone can read Erin Myers, and they can read Hofstede, and they can read Champagners, but there are some really nice YouTube videos where they actually talk about this and what it looks like in real life, and they describe certain cultures in details. So I tell students that if you want to watch a keynote speech or watch a TED talk or something like that, then do that instead of reading the article. Essentially obtain information, let's discuss, and let's see, and then let's see how you can relate to the information, how you interpret the information. Do you agree with how these people view these different cultures or not? Let me just move on to this second slide. So in what context do you typically, or based on your experience, should instructors discuss the US American culture and subcultures or the campus culture? So is there normally a certain situation? Is there normally a topic, something that you have throughout the 16, 15, 14 weeks of your semester when the topic of culture might come up? And what do you do? What do you discuss?
I have to say, I mean, this is kind of, I had started putting a question together for the chat box, and every time I got close to hitting enter, you were kind of beginning to answer the question I was asking. And it was actually maybe in a way easier before I transitioned to a more narrow field where I had more flexibility over my content choices. And now my content choices are more narrow. I have flexibility in other ways. So, but even under the old model or the new model, the complexity of doing this respectfully, and I almost feel like I'm scared to move forward in any direction, because in any direction I turn, I'll make 99 mistakes for every one thing that I do correctly. And how can you honor the complexities but keep it contained, because that's not the only thing that you're trying to accomplish, but yet it's everything. It's everything and it's nothing. And I'm beginning to sort of feel like the student who shuts down, because I just can't process all of this into actionable items. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, just the keynote speech that we heard just an hour ago. It was loaded with information, and of course, as I'm listening, I'm thinking, okay, what do we do? What do we do next so then we don't do it wrong, so then we actually do it right? And what's the follow-up? How do we proceed? So so I understand your point that how do we bring up talking about the American culture or the subcultures? But what about the campus culture? Do you ever discuss the campus culture with your English language learners?
I definitely do, and I'm kind of perpetually trying to get students to engage with the campus culture, because I know they feel kind of separated from it. So luckily this semester I'm in charge of the student activities program as well, so we're trying to do a lot of stuff on campus and close by, so that students are kind of aware that there's more available to them than just the classroom and their dorm room. But as far as the American culture and subcultures go, it's kind of I have exactly the same kind of fears as Heather, except I think they're multiplied by the fact that I don't even understand them myself, because clearly I'm not from here, right? So the chances of me getting it wrong, I would say, are at least 100%, and I don't want to get it wrong. So sometimes there are easy questions that I can answer, but other times, I say, oh, ask Mr. whatever, because he's American. He knows the answer to that, or we could ask. I do kind of cop out of those a little bit.
Louise and Heather, is it kind of just like the topic is too big? Like, how can you teach about American culture? Is that it?
Yeah, it's kind of like Christina said at the beginning. It's like, well, how much time have you got? For classes, I've got less than 2 hours 4 times a week with all this other stuff that I have to kind of. So I feel like part of the curriculum that international students should be, even if it's just like an hour a day or 2 hours a week or whatever, like an American culture orientation. Because yes, it's big, and 2, I'm scared of getting it wrong.
I just put this in the chat, but I think that the mistakes are part of the process. And our students are constantly trying things that aren't working. I mean, that's what they do with language and culture, and we get to also make mistakes in front of them. So I think it's okay to try and fail and say, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Because it's a real recognition. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm always saying to her, mistakes are just a chance to learn and grow, and so I think we can sort of take that approach with ourselves as well, that we're in community, we're doing our best, and we get to try and fall and get back up again.
Good point.
And what our keynote speaker said really resonated with me. She showed us the campus map, and she showed how sometimes the ESL programs are not necessarily on the central campus, off campus, far away building. And unless there's like a field trip or something, students might not be involved in the campus activities. And I'm thinking that yeah, I've been to many institutions where that was the case, but I've been to I've taught at colleges where no, students were on campus, but I still don't think that they were necessarily part of clubs and organizations, or I don't think that they necessarily participated in campus events. And I don't know who needs to do more sort of reaching out and making sure that they are included. Because especially if we start taking seriously the diversity, equity, and inclusion, these words, well, then we can also start thinking about how to include students, and not just us, but the leadership on any campus can start thinking about it. I often have the feeling that they don't necessarily think about the international students when they discuss student matters. So they just focus on domestic students, and I never really understood that mistake. Like, why wouldn't you think about that? And every now and then I can see that there's maybe one program out there, the international club, and then that's the space for international students, the language and culture exchange. But something that I noticed at AU is there's a club, and it's called the Gamers Club or Gaming Club. And oh yeah, a lot of international students actually joined it. But I'm thinking, well, yeah, but you guys are sitting there playing with your headphones on. And I get that you're in the same space, but you're in your own virtual reality. So I don't know. I mean, maybe some connections or some relationships are being formed there, but at least that's one step towards it. And I think that would be really beneficial, not only for international students, but domestic students as well. At AU, we have so many courses. For instance, at the School of International Service, all these intercultural and international relations and communications. And I feel, there are all these international students who could probably show up and talk about the cultures firsthand, but I don't think that they are invited. I think that's a missed opportunity for sure. And just one thing about subcultures, I learned a lot about the subcultures of China or Saudi Arabia, or just any countries I could probably name. Before I started talking about American subcultures in my course or in my courses, I asked them if they could bring in some examples of subcultures from their home countries or hometowns, and it's surprising. I learned so much about the world that I had no idea about, I think I had one Chinese student who was so sweet. He said that, you know, in China, we have this subculture. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like hard rock. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard all that one. But he said that it's I guess because, you know, popular songs are more widespread than you know, metal, hard metal or hard rock. He really thought that he stood out. And I'm like, well, you know, a little bit of time travel, because I think I was really into that in like the 80s or early 90s. But I guess it's really is popular there right now.
Well, and
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I just went in, I think, in a different direction from some of you guys with that last question. I think some of you went really big. I went really small. So one way that I think I introduce culture is by like when I discuss plagiarism. Students are so afraid of plagiarism, like they're going to break the law and go to jail or something. So I kind of talk about plagiarism as like an aspect of North American academic culture. And it's like not right or wrong in the world. Like there are plenty of cultures where the appropriate thing to do is use someone else's words without citation. Like that's a way of honoring them and showing your connection to that body of work and your awareness of that philosopher or whatever. So framing norms of plagiarism, you know, that if you write something, it's your property, it belongs to you, and you should give recognition to that person, that that's an aspect of this subculture that is not the only way of viewing things, but this subculture of North American academic culture has been a helpful way for me to frame that.
Yeah, that sounds like a much more constructive way than just you will go to university prison if you do that.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Something that my students often laugh at when we do, and you know, speaking of plagiarism, when we talk about, okay, how to avoid plagiarism and source integration, doing it properly, doing it thoroughly, and it's, you know, it's basically a matter of precision and so on. And so when I talk about, for instance, okay, we're going to follow the ICE method, like integrate, cite, explain, or we're going to do a quote sandwich. Here's a hamburger. So you start with this. And then I said, okay, so paragraph writing, we have a meal plan. AM stands for the main idea. And they always look at me and I said, so you have to understand it's very American. But if you learn something, we compare it with food. And I tell them, you know, when you start skiing, it's either pizza or French fries. And they always laugh and they're like, the Americans. I'm like, yeah, it's all about food, guys. So just, you know, sometimes you can just bring in you know, these small things and sort of, you know, lighthearted but true. And I tell them that if there's you know, if you're ill and the doctor says that you have whatever, oh, it's the size of an apple, or it's like a small egg, or so I tell them that it's very cultural to compare things to food. But yeah, that's just a very small explanation of what culture might be, or how, you know, it is manifested in our everyday activities, or in the world of academia where you have to write. Let me ask you this question right here. So the term intersectionality has been widespread. It's been discussed everywhere in the past, I want to say 2-3 years at least. Do you read about intersectionality? Do you talk about it? And not just necessarily in your courses. And if you have any material to share, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Maybe this is something that that you might be able to use in the future. Intersectionality is a concept that I often discuss with my students when we talk about culture, because especially if they're newcomers, for them, it's very sort of, black and white. It's very clear. Americans are, and then they have some stereotypical pictures about Americans in general. And so when they see sort of, social justice activities on campus or on TV or, on YouTube, we talk about intersectionality and the importance, and then how, and just going back to the complexity of culture, the complexity of a human being. Sometimes we have students who come from very conservative cultures. And for instance, talking with them can be challenging because most of them typically aren't ready to challenge their own thinking, their own way of thinking, to accept that there is such diversity out there. But I would say that just tackling this topic and just showing them how complex people are, it actually changes the dynamics in the room. And so sometimes those bold statements about, all gay people are blah, 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 or all people of color, blah, blah. So then they have sort of those, stereotypical hurtful sentiments. And once you start discussing intersectionality, I see that going down or not coming up at all. And I think it's just the very simple, the very simple answer is just, exploring how complex we all are. And again, through metacognition, through reflection, they get that. I often show them passages or video clips from Kimberly Crenshaw. She's so smart, and she has, she explains things in such simple terms that students can absolutely understand where she's coming from. And I think the other person is, who's the other one that I normally refer to? I think his name is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's been on TED Talk, he's been keynote speaker at different events, and I either show clips of interviews with him as well, where he really just, explains what it really means. And students seeing that is helpful. Or we talk about, sometimes there are these really fun video clips, well, not fun, but revealing video clips, so they can be funny as well. Students being interviewed on campus, and often there are Asian students, students from the Far East or the Middle East, and they talk about how when people ask them, and when I say Far East and Middle East, I mean that heritage, but they are American born. Sometimes their language is, they're monolingual, so they only speak English. The heritage language is already gone. But, where are you from? Where are your people from? All these questions. So then these students explaining those stereotypes away, Asian students talking about how they're not good at math. And so I can see the international students like, yeah, they always ask me that question, and I'm not very, and that's so true. Or just, sort of these typical conversations that might come up. So that's definitely something that I recommend to discuss with the students once they watch these video clips, to then relate to how how do they interpret them, and how it relates to them, and just the fact that be ready that there will be people out there asking you these questions as well, and how can you handle these questions so you don't turn it into an altercation, so you don't say something offensive. Or if they say something to you that offensive, how do you push back, but gently, so then once again it doesn't turn into something violent, something unwanted. And so let me ask this question again. Do you ever discuss intersectionality in with your students? Is there an opportunity, or is there any material that you can share with us? And I'm also checking the chat box, sorry. I saw that there were so many notes in there. Paulina, go ahead, please.
Paulina, are you there?
Oh,
She has something in the chat box if you want to read it.
yes.
So Paulina says, I work on problematizing and deconstructing the term American culture that the students often use. I want the students to recognize the existence of great cultural diversity and cultural complexity of the US, as well as decolonize our language and remember that, excuse me, and remember that America is not one particular country. Yes. Exactly that. And even our students are in a particular geographical area of the US. They'd be having a very different experience if they were in Texas or Idaho, you know. So
I do think it warrants pointing out that that can be said of many countries as well. I remember asking, my husband loves to eat. So anytime he sees somebody who, where's the best place to get Mexican food? Where's the best place to get? And this was when we were living in Winchester. And the man's response was, well, what type of Mexican do you want? Because there's many different varieties. And so, it was just, I'm obviously hungry. I didn't have lunch. So the point being just that we often, I don't know if the US is maybe messier than any other nation state is, or I don't know. But certainly other nations are also kind of not so clear cut.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Sorry.
yes, we can.
Yes.
Sorry about something was not working. I will have my camera off, but yes, and I think that there's another aspect that when we get our students, and it also depends on where our students are coming from, and when our students come from underrepresented backgrounds or backgrounds that are historically marginalized in their home countries, they're actually greatly aware of the cultural diversity and intersectionality and complexities of culture because they experience this cultural marginalization all their lives. But when we get students who come from the dominant cultural backgrounds, they see the culture as the monolith very often and think that this is, well, this is one culture. I come from this country, this is the culture, because yes, they come from mainstream cultural framework and they are not reminded every single day that they need to adhere or act differently or change something or acculturate. And perhaps when they come to the United States, this is one of their first experiences when all of a sudden they are othered as a cultural group. So it's very interesting work that we, I think, engage in and get them to understand all of these very complex cultural nuances and dynamics.
Yes, thank you, Paulina. Thank you very much. I mean, it's you just summed it up exactly how it is. And because we only have a few more minutes left here, let me ask this one question, and we won't have time to discuss two other questions, but these slides are shared on Canvas. I can also drop the link in the chat box just in case you want to think about and maybe provide feedback or suggestions on any of the questions later on. But so the last question here is, do you teach or coach students in cross-cultural communication skills? And can you measure competency or adjustments or levels of adjustment?
So not so much about the measuring part, but just the cross-cultural communication. I think it comes up it comes up sometimes in terms of vocabulary or what's appropriate in certain contexts and stuff. And so I try to bring that into the picture when possible, but it's not something I admit that I consciously do or plan for necessarily. But it's good to be more mindful of.
And of course, earlier we, when we listened to the speech about anti-racist education and decolonizing the syllabus, my question was, as I was listening to our keynote speaker today, is, so when you teach academic writing, so what is it that you not teach, or what do you teach differently? So then you're anti-racist, or because often people talk about the authors that you use or the sources that you offer to the students. But I would like to think that it's more than that, it's beyond that. And so this is when we can spend the next 2-3 hours sitting here thinking about, okay, what is anti-racist academic writing skills teaching? Or what is anti-racist, listening and speaking skills teaching? It's almost like we end up with more questions than answers, because it is such a complex topic itself. But yeah, I mean, just to answer this question itself, what I can think of about, teaching students cross-cultural communication skills is basically how I teach them, academic writing, because essentially chances are that the North American, as Tabitha was saying, the North American way of writing and spelling and source citation and whatnot is going to be different from, or somewhat different from, what they might be used to. And
I just point out at this juncture that it's even different from the UK, so that the differences are more than just in language. I had to learn the US academic culture.
So it almost seems that integrating these types of explicit analysis in academic writing, as well as bringing sources from diverse global backgrounds, almost, or problematizing kind of the ideology in academic writing.
Right. All right. So I think that we are.
We do have to draw to a very rapid close,
Yes.
unfortunately for us, but fortunately for the next session. But I was just kind of idly wondering to myself, this has actually been such a good conversation and people kind of sharing resources and things like that. If in a month's time, would anyone be interested in a follow-up? I don't know. It's the first time in a long time we've kind of had an engaged conversation in a SIG session. So,
Thank you for asking that question. I've been too afraid to ask, like, do you have time in a month to talk?
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of finding time in amongst everything else, but
And I would say that, you know, today's keynote speech definitely emphasized the need to start asking questions and to start addressing those questions, coming up with some sort of solutions, because, you know, I would say that it was definitely thought-provoking. And I kept asking, or I kept answering some of, you know, her statements, and like, okay, but how do I do it? Okay, but when? But why? So it's almost like I could answer some of those, you know, thought-provoking statements with questions that, okay, I need help. I would like to know more about it. And I think that we are all collectively have come to that point that we have read about, we have heard about anti-racist education, we have seen social justice movements happening. My question is, okay, how can I be part of it? I would like to be part of this team. I would like to take things forward. And I think that we can advertise for this professional learning circle and invite you all back.
I think that'd be great to have a professional learning circle like this. And just a super quick preview, because I just got 2 workshop participants confirmed for an AU workshop in the spring. And these 2 people actually going to do a workshop on teaching anti-racist rhetoric in English as an additional language courses. And they did a fantastic presentation at TESOL International in March. And that's why we're inviting them. So last Saturday of February, basically 3 hours will be spent on trying, I think, on working on the questions that Christina, you just posed.
great. Thank you for that.
All right, that's great, exciting. So maybe by the time we get there in February, we'll have a bunch of answers, and we'll just say, listen, we have all these tools, you know, tool belt, equipment 1. Challenge accepted.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming along. The next session that's going to be taking place in this room is with Nancy Overman, and it's called Foster Autonomy, Analytical Skills and Agency Through Reading and Writing Circles. So you are very welcome to stay and join that. I want to say thank you for coming and thank you for contributing. It's been great.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.
Nice to talk to you all.
Tabitha, so once we, okay, so we should hit stop recording.